Good tidings, everyone. This is Michael Gobier from the Hey, it's Enrico Palazzo Fantasy Baseball Podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our feature presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 277, 2023, the year in pop culture. Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. It's our first show of season 9. We got lots in store for you this season. We got upcoming guests, some old friends joining us again, our usual movie reviews and trivia and dad jokes, all that stuff. You know, all those things you've come to expect from us around here. But before we get into the new year, we're going to start with a look back on the year that was 2023 in pop culture. Now, you know, we always start every show by doing a quick review of anything we've been able to take in regard to pop culture since our last show. Since we took time off over the holidays, we've no doubt got lots of stuff to talk about, I'm sure. Maybe even a book or two, you know, in addition to movies and TV shows, who knows? But Derek, welcome back from holidays, my friend.
Thank you, Chris. I hope your holidays were great. You had a safe and happy Christmas and Happy New Year in your house, I assume?
Yeah, I did. How about you? Before we get into our pop culture, did you get any nice gifts for Christmas? Was Santa good to you?
Yes, Santa is always good to me. You know, I'm spoiled by the people that love me, and clearly Santa is one of them. Mm-hmm. And yeah, got a lot of nice stuff. Got to spend some time with friends and family. Some folks that I don't get to see that often. One of the great things about the holiday season is most people, at least most of my friends, are off work, or even those who are in school are off school. So with everybody has a little free time on their hands, it makes it a lot easier to try and get together, even if it's just for, you know, a coffee or a beer or a quick FaceTime or Skype chat or something. So yeah, it's always a good time of year to catch up with some folks. I know I reached out to a few people I hadn't heard from in a while, and I had a few people reach out to me that I hadn't heard from in a long time. So it's always a good time to reconnect. So if you listen to the podcast and you know, you got a few minutes on your hands, I would suggest go through your contact list, find someone that you haven't heard from in a while, and just reach out out of the blue and say, hi, how's it going? How's your new year? And you'd be surprised. You know, I was pleasantly surprised that, you know, as I was reaching out to some of these folks, they got back to me pretty quickly, and we were able to just catch up a little bit. It was nice.
Oh, that's a nice sentiment. I'm more about the materialistic aspect of Christmas. I'm just kidding. But I did get a lot of good stuff. So I want to mention, I got tickets to see Jerry Seinfeld in May.
Nice.
That's cool. And I also got tickets in July to go see Def Leppard, Journey, and the Steve Miller Band all in one go.
Very nice.
That's going to be good. Nice. I also got some nice binders for my Star Wars collection and socks. I got lots of socks. Oh, you know what else I got too? I totally forgot. I got a new ride symbol. My wife bought me a new ride symbol. Actually, you want to hear it? I'm here in the studio. You want me to just show you what it sounds like? It's really cool.
I don't even know what that. Oh, like a symbol, like on a drum kit?
On my drum kit. My drum kit's just over here in the corner.
Like
I got a new.
I'm thinking like a logo symbol. I'm like, a symbol? What the hell do you need a symbol
it's a ride
for?
Here,
superhero?
I'm just going to take my cans off here for a second. I'm just going to go over if you're cool with that. Okay. Hold on. I'm a little bit winded. Had a little bit too much eggnog over the holidays, I think. I don't know. Oh my God.
It might have been the rum in the eggnog.
That's true. That's true. You know, I do that. But any pop culture you were able to take in over the holidays?
Oh my God, so much. But actually, let me go back to your original question because I sort of dodged the question unintentionally. So as far as the material things, one of the things that I got for Christmas that I think you would definitely get a kick out of, and I think a lot of our listeners would get a kick out of, is I got this book. I've had my eye on it for quite some time. It's $50. It's a hardcover. It's a coffee table book, and like, $50 is not nothing. So I've sort of had my eye on it, and I've been humming and hawing. And my brother, great guy that he is, went onto my Amazon wish list, saw that it was on there and that it had been on there for a while, and he bought it for Christmas. It's called The Art of Atari, and it's this giant, super thick coffee table book, and it's like all about the cover art and the interior art of the original Atari video games, all the art that's on the outside of their consoles from arcades, all the art that was on the boxes of the cartridges of the video games, all the art that was in the instruction booklets. And this giant coffee table book is just amazing. It's so beautiful. The color, the art is so fantastic. And I've had my eye on it for a while. It's called Art of Atari. And it's like, even though I don't have an Atari anymore, but when I was growing up, like so many people of our generation, I had an Atari 2600 in my house, and I remember all this stuff. And even though some of the games weren't great, and even though some of the art of the game that was on the screen wasn't great because the technology was so limiting, the box art was always so amazing. And so this book just blew me away when I saw it. So that was definitely one of my most cherished material things that I got.
Very cool. That sounds like a good one.
But getting back to the pop culture. So
yes.
I know we don't want this episode to be 5 hours long, so I won't.
We got lots to get to.
Detail.
Yeah.
I probably watched 20 or 30 movies. I had a chance to take a little vacation, do some traveling, and I saw a ton of stuff. So, I had some time. So I'll just write down the list. I won't even talk about a lot of them. I just want to acknowledge that I saw them so I don't forget. So one of the ones I want to start with is I mentioned on the last couple of shows, I've got the Dirty Harry movies on my recorder, and I'm working my way through them. So I had a chance to watch the third one called The Enforcer, which I don't remember ever seeing before. I mean, I know I watched all the Dirty Harrys before, but I don't remember it. It had Tyne Daly, and let me tell you, it's a real movie of its time. It's part of the plot is that it's in the 70s, and she's like sort of the first female police detective on the San Francisco police force, and like it. Wow. Like, it's a real sort of eye-opener reminder of just sort of how far we've come in such a short period of time, and how much crap she has to put up with.
Her name wasn't Cagney, was it? Or was she Lacey? I can't remember.
I don't remember. But based on this, I think obviously that's what set her up for Cagney and Lacey. But anyway, it was good. It was what it was. I got two more Dirty Harrys to go. I didn't have a chance to get through them, but I did see another Clint Eastwood one called In the Line of Fire. It was from the early 90s, and it has John Malkovich and Rene Russo's in it. And I remember seeing this in the theater in the early 90s, and that was it. And then it showed up again on one of my channels. I watched it, and I'm like, it was okay. It wasn't fantastic, but it was better than I remembered it. So again, sort of a lot of Clint Eastwood going on. And then again, a couple of older ones older in that they're, not super new, but had a chance to watch on New Year's Eve, we watched Trading Places.
Oh, yes.
Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd.
Yes.
And we're like, because we were like, hey, look, this is
1983. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, this is a Christmas and a New Year's movie. So I was like, nice. So we had a chance to rewatch that. And then a movie I just watched this week that I had never ever seen before, sticking with the Trading Places, is Kentucky Fried Movie.
Oh, nice.
Have you ever seen it?
I have. Of course I have. Came out of the Kentucky Fried Theater back in the 70s. John Landis. One of my favorite parts in it was the Catholic high school girls in trouble.
Oh my God, yes. It's like, it's practically an ad for a porno movie.
Oh, yeah.
But for those who are not familiar, it's basically... Think of like almost like a Saturday Night Live type episode where it's like it's a movie that's a bunch of like sketches almost, but they're not, it's not improv. Like, well, I mean, it might have been, but it's clearly, it's like fake movie trailers and then little short films and TV ads and stuff. It's bizarre. But
Zucker, Abrams and Zucker were involved.
Yep. Zaz. Yep. So it had been on my watch list of, if I see this one coming around, I'm going to watch it. It was on, of all channels, Turner Classic Movies a couple of weeks ago. So I recorded it, finally had a chance to watch it. Again, it wasn't amazing, but it was on my bucket list, so I'm glad I had a chance to watch it. Had a chance to watch Runaway Jury, based on the John Grisham book, starring John Cusack. Again, saw it in the theater, didn't really remember it very well. Totally forgot who it's Gene Hackman and Dustin Hoffman as the two lawyers. This movie is way better than I remembered it being. I really enjoyed it. So if you have a chance, Runaway Jury was pretty good. Cool. And Then I did a couple of George Clooney movies. I watched Syriana and Michael Clayton. And honestly, in my mind, I had those two mixed up. So I'm sitting down to watch Syriana and go, this is one where he's the political fixer, right? This is one he won his Oscar for. Well, it is the one he won his Oscar for, but it's not the one where he's a political fixer. That's Michael Clayton. Syriana, he's like a government agent, and it's all about oil, and it's this long. It's like the movie's almost 3 hours. I mean, they're both decent movies, but you can pass on both of those. Unless you're a huge George Clooney fan, I would say pass. And then a couple of brand new ones. Again, just mention them. There was a new sci-fi one called The Creator. I think it's on Disney, if I remember correctly. And it stars Denzel Washington's son. His name's escaped me. John something Washington. Again, you would hate it, Chris. It's sort of end of the world. The robots have taken over. The humans and the robots are fighting. It's in the post-apocalyptic future. I thought it was great. You would hate it, but if you have Disney, give it a look. Another end of the world one that was just on a couple of weeks ago, dropped I think on Netflix. It's called Leave the World Behind. It stars Julia Roberts and Mahershala Ali. And it was really good. Again, it's this family that does an Airbnb. They go out into the country just for the weekend, and then the world comes to an end, and the people they're renting the Airbnb from actually come home because they're like, we got nowhere else to go. The world's ending. And it's more of a character study than anything else, but it was good. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. Leave the World Behind on Netflix. Take a look at that one. And then last, sort of a documentary, not sort of a documentary. So I don't know if you need to play the music or not, but there's a series that I've been watching on the History Channel called The Toys That Built America. Mm-hmm. And the third season's out now, and each episode's an hour long. And they basically they give you a reenactment of these people who created games and toys and things of that nature, hence the Toys That Built America. And I watched a really good episode a couple weeks ago, and it was about the guys who created Trivial Pursuit and the guys who invented Pictionary. And nice. I know the Trivial Pursuit guys were actually Canadian, or
they were Canadian. Yep,
they were in Montreal when they started putting it together. But it was fascinating to just watch, and I knew a little bit about it already, but it's just a fascinating story about how Trivial Pursuit came to be, and the kind of numbers and the kind of dollars that came out of it. It was just bananas. And same with Pictionary. That's a game that I'm not a huge fan of, but I know has been very popular over the years, and so they sort of intercut the two stories together. But it was really good. If you have the History Channel, and you're looking for something to watch, this series, The Toys That Built America, honestly, some episodes are better than others, but the last few I've watched have been very strong. So anyway, that's about it.
Wow.
Lots and lots and lots. Nothing that was a complete stinker, but nothing that really stood out to me as an A+++. I would say of all the things I watched, probably the newer one, Leave the World Behind, was among the better ones. I mean, Trading Places is an A+, but I think by now people listening to this podcast have probably seen that one a few times. And then there's a couple brand new ones, but I'm sure we'll get to that when we do our 2023 movie review. So I'll talk a little bit more about a couple of those when we get there.
Mine was kind of a stinker. Over the break there, we were sitting around one night, and my wife says, she's like, I want to watch a movie as a family, like her and I and the two boys. So she goes on Disney Plus and she picks out an old movie from like 94, I think it was. It was called The Big Green. Have you ever heard of it before?
No, I don't think it's the one I'm thinking of. The Big Green. No,
I had never even heard of it. And for good reason. It really sucked. So it was about this teacher from England who comes to this small town in Texas, and she makes the kids play soccer. And then, of course...
I'm looking at the cover box. This was a big renter when I was at Blockbuster. I've never seen it. Yeah,
like this team, and then they go to the championship and all that stuff. It's so dumb, right? Predictable, right? So Steve Guttenberg was in it. He was the town sheriff, and Olivia Dabo was the teacher. Now, it got me thinking about Olivia Dabo. I want to talk about her a little bit because it brought back some memories for me as I'm watching this movie. So, first of all, you probably remember her best as the hippie older sister on The Wonder Years.
I never watched Wonder Years, so no.
That's what I think most people would know her from, because she didn't do much else. Although she did appear in one movie that I will never forget. And as I'm watching this movie, I'm like, oh man, I remember her. So here's a little story for you from my youth. Okay. So back when I was 14 years old, me and my best friend snuck into the movie theater to see the R-rated film Bolero with Bo Derek. Okay. And Olivia Dabo was in the movie. She was the same age as me at the time. She was 14 years old in this movie. And she was really pretty. So I was like immediately smitten by her, And there's this one scene, she's in this bathtub, covered in suds, and then she stands up and she does a full frontal nude scene. 14 years old.
Wow, that doesn't sound
How did John
legal.
Derek not get arrested for that? Like, what the actual hell? It's crazy. So there's like 14-year-old me like shocked that I'm seeing a girl my age with no clothes on, which is basically a crime. You know, like, how'd that ever get into a Hollywood movie? I mean, I know the 80s were lax on that, you know, but it's illegal, you know? So anyway, so you fast forward to Christmas 2023. I'm watching her in some dumb low budget movie about kids in Texas playing soccer. So anyway, my Christmas movie watching experience wasn't all that great. Oh, and Derek, my wife and I broke from our annual Christmas tradition. Every year, her and I watch Die Hard. Well, not only do we watch Die Hard, we watch Die Hard and we break out a bottle of Kraken rum and watch Die Hard. Unleash the Kraken! This year we didn't do it. We didn't watch Die Hard.
I was going to say, did you not have any rum?
Well, no, it wasn't that. My wife spent all this time online. She was looking for this like last minute Caribbean holiday she wanted to go on. We never ended up finding one. So I didn't get to go away. I didn't get to watch Die Hard, and I got stuck watching The Big Green. Thank God Santa brought me some socks at least, and a ride cymbal, you know, so there's always that. So anyway, I got this.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
Derek, I got a joke for you where it's actually like I'm going to tell the joke. It's like no punchline kind of thing. All right.
Yours don't usually have a good punchline. So this won't be much different than
exactly.
normal.
So you're used to it. Okay. Kevin Sorbo, Dean Cain, and Scott Baio walk into a bar. The bartender says, "You guys are too early for your shift." See, you probably thought I was going to get political there, didn't you? Yeah.
No, but
no. I'm turning.
That was actually pretty good.
Yeah, I'm turning over a new leaf in 2024. I promise. Really. I'm your head counselor.
I did not enjoy this anymore the second time.
What's going on? What's wrong?
Never seen it. Never interested in seeing it. No desire to see it. Was not interested at all.
Oh, I paid $200 for these shoes, but I mean, I'm the best.
It's certainly tame by today's standards.
There's a very fat pair of pants hanging from the flagpole this morning.
It is not something I think I ever need to see again.
No!
Matt Damon.
So, Derek, every year here on the podcast, we kick off our new season with a look back at the year that was in pop culture. You know me, I'm perpetually stuck in 1989. So I usually rely on you to do a lot of the heavy lifting with all the new stuff. But, you know, I think I'd like to start by looking back at some of the movies that came out in 2023. Okay? Yep. One thing that kind of got me, I was taking a look at the box office. There used to be a time when making $100 million at the domestic U.S. box office was like a huge thing. That was a milestone. And the thing is, I think overall, like, you tend to think like going to see the movies in the theaters, like dying off, you know, but there were 24 movies that took in $100 million or more last year. 24.
Well, and that is definitely an accomplishment, but you got to remember, it costs like $20 a head to get in the theater. And if it's an IMAX or a 3D or some special showing VIP, like, the per ticket price can be as much as $30. So yes, that's a huge accomplishment, but I'll bet if you adjust those numbers for inflation, these $100 million movies, like, they're not, when you compare them to movies from even 10 or 15 years ago, they probably are not performing as well as that number would lead you to believe.
Yeah, I mean, I get inflation and all, but that's a lot of big money making movies. Like, especially when you think about post-COVID and sort of, you know, the availability of all these streaming services, and some movies go straight to the streamers. And I mean, you can rent movies at home almost immediately after they come out in the theater. So
that's fair.
It really does seem like going to the movies is still a thing, though, obviously. Do you think?
Yes and no. And we've talked about this before, and I don't want to get too bogged down on it in this one, but I think theater going movies have become more events. It's things like big franchises, big adaptations, big intellectual properties. So you get things like Marvel movies, you get things like Harry Potter movie. Well, not anymore, but you know what I mean? Like things like a Harry Potter movie, you know, or big events like Mission Impossible, which we'll talk about in a minute. Like that's a huge franchise. And then you also just get huge stars where it's like, well, when this person puts out a movie, people are going to go to the theater to see it because they have faith that this person knows what they're doing. Whether it's like Spielberg put out a movie last year, and I went to the theater to see it just based on Spielberg, and I didn't really care for it. I mean, it wasn't what I was expecting. It was a long, boring drama, and it got award accolades and all the rest of that. But I'm like, The Fabelmans to me was sort of a not his best work, but he had my money as soon as they said coming to theaters, a Steven Spielberg movie. So there's definitely still people going to the movies, and I think it's driven, the big numbers are driven by these things I just talked about, but I think the word of mouth helps. So like one of the things, you know, the movie that won the Best Picture Oscar just in this past year that actually came out the year before was Everything Everywhere All at Once. When it came out, it didn't immediately do well, but the movie was so good. The quality was so good. The performances were so good. It was such an original concept. The word of mouth got around, and people made a point of going to see it in the theater once the buzz got going. And I think there was some of that this summer with some of the other movies as well, not necessarily to that same extent, but I think that's sort of where we are now with movies. You have diehards that are going to go every week, but you know, I think both you and I, when we were younger, we were going every week or every couple of weeks. But I think last year I maybe saw between 5 and 10 movies in the theater, and that was enough. But most of them were those big IP movies I talked about originally. So
if we take a look at the box office, the number one film last year was Barbie. Took in $636 million. That's a lot of money. Number two was the Super Mario Brothers movie. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse was number 3. Clocking in number 4, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And then number 5 was Oppenheimer. And then, you know, a whole bunch of other movies here, like Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. I never even heard of that. John Wick, Chapter 4, Sound of Freedom, made $184 million. Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. What the hell is that? $159 million. How the hell did that make money?
Yeah, it just came out. It's a prequel to it's a series that people are already familiar with based on books that people have already read. And they're like, hey, we know what that is. That's a safe choice, or they believe that's a safe choice, so they pay the money to go see it.
Five Nights at Freddy's, $137 million. The Flash, I don't know. This is craziness. So I'm assuming you obviously went to see quite a few films in the theater last year, right?
Yeah, like I said, probably more than 5 and less than 10, if I had to guess. And as we go, like I've got a list of a few movies here that I want to talk about, and how many of these did I see in the theater? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the movies on my list I saw in the theater.
So you might be surprised. I actually went to the movies 3 times last year. I saw 3 movies in the theater last year, which is pretty impressive, you know, considering you saw 6. I saw Super Mario Brothers movie. Now, keep in mind, I got young kids. So yeah. I saw Super Mario Brothers movie. And then my youngest son wanted me to go see Meg 2, The Trench. So I went and saw that. And I also saw 65. All 3 of them I didn't like. I thought they were all kind of crappy.
I saw 65 and it was garbage. And I watched the Meg 2 and it was, not good either. And Mario Brothers just doesn't interest me. So.
Sorry, I also watched The Whale last year. Now it just came to mind. I didn't see it in the theater though. Like I watched it on home streaming. Yeah. My wife made me watch it. So that was so I saw 4 movies from last year. So not bad.
Well, The Whale technically came out the year before because it was qualifying for the Oscars.
Oh, right? Right. Speaking of Oscars, they're not going to be announced until January 23rd, but we can do a little bit of speculation. So I'd like to start, like, what films do you think might get nominations for Best Picture? Barbie, probably, I guess. Oppenheimer. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse seems to be getting a lot of big buzz, right?
Yeah, it's I think... So what's happened in the last few years, at least based on my experience, is that, to your point, these big movies, there's always a handful of the big movies that get nominated. In part, they're big movies because they were good and the performances were good and they're deserving of these nominations and this accolades. But what I also find is, as is always the case, a whole bunch of, like, I'll call them sort of artsy movies. And that's not a derogatory, but I mean, like, movies that maybe your mainstream audience isn't immediately going to flock to the theater to see, but they release them in limited release just before Christmas to make them eligible for these big awards, but they don't actually get the, like, theatrical release or the buzz and the marketing stuff until, like, now. So, you know, I was reading a thing the other day where they were talking about, these are, like, even just looking at the Golden Globe nominations, which are already out, and I'm like looking down the list going, I don't recognize half of these movies. I never even heard of these movies. And then you look and it's like, this one was released in 10 theaters in Los Angeles and New York to qualify. It's like, well, that's why I never heard of it. It isn't really out yet. So to your point, the ones you just mentioned, I'm sure we'll all get some sort of acknowledgement, but I'm sure there's going to be a dozen others that are more of the, the artsy fartsy kind of smaller, and I say smaller, but they're not, because it's probably still, like, I'm thinking like the Bradley Cooper one that just dropped where he's the music conductor. Like, they're saying that's going to get nominated for Best Picture, Best Director,
The Maestro,
Best Performer.
yeah.
That's the one. Yeah. It's like, I hear that and I'm like, well, that sounds like a little artsy fartsy movie, but it probably cost $100 million to make. And so I'm sure there's a bunch like that I'm just, honestly, I don't know. I haven't heard of them yet. So
You're right. There's always those small movies, but I mean, let's be honest. Oppenheimer's going to win, right? I mean, it's the Academy. They love stuff like that, and it's Christopher Nolan's time, right? Like all the politics and everything. Hollywood loves period pieces and the actual historical figures and stuff. There's no way Barbie is going to win. It's Oppenheimer that they'll pick.
I don't know. Barbie was pretty good. The timing of Barbie is really good as well. I think to
win an Oscar for Best Picture.
Well, but I think the message of the movie is important too. Like, look back on some of the Oscars over the years, and sometimes you look back after and you go, how did this movie win over these other ones? And you sort of go, well, given where we were in the political climate and what the movie was saying at the time, it was important, which is not to belittle Barbie, that 10 years from now, if it does win, you look back and say that wasn't deserving, because it was fantastic. And I truly believe if it wins, it is absolutely deserving. But yeah, to your point, I haven't seen Oppenheimer, but I heard it's like 3 hours and it's got a cast of like everybody famous you've ever seen in your life. So it won't surprise me if it wins, but I wouldn't be surprised. Like, what was the Scorsese one that came out? The Flower Moon, Killers of the Flower Moon with Leonardo DiCaprio. Again, I haven't seen it. I heard it's really long, but I've heard it's, for those people that like Scorsese films, I've heard it's really good. And Leonardo DiCaprio is amazing in it. I'm like, again, I haven't seen it yet. So can't really talk about whether or not I believe it's qualified or worthy or not.
But I mean, like, Best Director, Christopher Nolan's a lock, I think. That's what I don't know.
For a nomination?
No, to win. I think he's going to win.
I mean, if the Oscars do what they always do and they basically give a legacy award, to your point, this guy's been nominated a lot of times and has a great body of work. Yeah. And if we acknowledge this and give it to him, the risk of not giving a person an award when they're truly deserving of it and then giving it to them later, you always end up feel like you're giving it to them for something lesser. Like Scorsese, we're just talking about. The Departed was a good movie, but it wasn't his best
not
work.
Even
not by a long shot.
Yeah,
and it's like, right. How did he not win for Raging Bull, Goodfellas, even Casino, or it's like, or some of his really early stuff like Taxi Driver? Like, how does he not win for any of those things? It's like, we'll give it to him for The Departed. It's like, you almost felt like the Academy's like, if we don't give it to him for this, his next movie might not even be this good. And it's like, okay, let's just give it to him. So you're right. Maybe for Nolan. And again, I haven't seen Oppenheimer, so maybe it is his absolute best work. But they look at his body of work and go, this guy deserves it, or deserves an acknowledgement. And if we don't do it now, maybe his work the quality starts to dip in the future. So who knows?
I think Best Actor, the Academy already loves Bradley Cooper. So I think he's a shoo-in for the Maestro. Right?
I think he's a strong favorite, yes.
He spent months apparently preparing for this role, and they love that kind of crap. So I think he's a shoo-in. Best Actress, Margot Robbie. She'll probably get nominated for Barbie, but I don't know if she would win.
I don't think she'll win.
It's not Oscar bait,
I agree.
So I think the movie probably has a better chance with Ryan Gosling as Best Supporting Actor.
He'll definitely get a Best Supporting, no question.
Yeah, I think he'll win that one too. So one thing I want to mention before we move on is Best Song. And the reason why I bring this up is my son mentioned this to me. He said the song Peaches from Super Mario Brothers movie will win Best Song.
Is that the one that Jack Black sings?
Yes, Jack Black is Bowser, and he sang the song.
That's what I've been hearing, too.
It was pretty good. So I saw the movie in the theater, like I mentioned, and it was by far the best part of that movie. I was laughing my ass off when that came on. You could tell he's just improvising the whole thing, but it was so good. And the thing was, it became a bit of a pop culture thing for a while there. Like, it was all over the place. So it might happen. Okay, so that's movies. Let's talk a little bit about TV shows. So for me, I mean, again, maybe I'm the wrong guy because I'm old and I'm stuck in the past. But for me, TV from 2023 starts and ends with Ted Lasso. The third and final season of Ted Lasso was perfect. And you and I did a whole episode on Ted Lasso on episode 259 in June of last year. So it should win the Emmy for Best Comedy. But I don't know if it will. I don't, because I was looking at it, and both Barry and The Bear, they said, are likely to be nominated as Best Comedy. And I did like both of those shows. But I don't know about you. I don't consider them to be comedies.
Yeah, so I agree. I think Ted Lasso is definitely going to get nominated. It's his third and final season of this incarnation of the show. Whether or not they come back for a fourth rebranded season, I don't know, but that's not the cards yet, and shouldn't be a factor on the acknowledgement of the season 3. But yeah, to your point, Barry is a show that I've watched every episode of. This last season was fantastic.
It was
again,
awesome.
I wouldn't necessarily call it a comedy.
No.
The Bear is one of those shows we've talked about before. I just personally haven't been able to get into it, but everybody who watches it swears it's the best thing on TV. So I think it's going to be a 3-way race between those 3, and maybe there's some dark horse comedy out there that we just neither of us watch that'll be in the running. But I'm sure it'll come down to one of those 3. And yeah, I mean, the 2 of those 3 that I watched, I thought were fantastic. So no disappointment from me if Barry wins or if Ted Lasso wins.
Well, because I actually watched those 2, I can actually speak to them. So this is something new for me. So Barry, I actually really liked that show.
Yeah, so did I.
I actually thought it was quite good how they wrapped it up. I remember I was watching the last episode, and I'm thinking, where is this going? Like, how can they wrap this up? But they did. And I don't want to give away any spoilers, in case anyone hasn't watched it. But, it's safe to say it was a given that I was going to like this show because my idol, Henry Winkler, is on it. I love when he plays against type. He was so good in Night Shift when he played against type. Remember, he was the opposite of the Fonz. And in Barry, he plays against type because he's the sleazeball, which is the opposite of himself in real life. He is one of the nicest people I have ever met in my entire life. Henry Winkler is a real deal. And then The Bear, my wife made me watch. And I didn't really get into it. She was watching the first season. It was just kind of okay for me. And then she stayed at it. And then I picked it up in season 2 and watched it with her. It was pretty good. I thought the second season had some pretty good moments in it. I really liked, there was one episode where they do this Thanksgiving in their house. And it's like a flashback, and Jamie Lee Curtis plays the mom. She was outstanding in that role. Man, that's 2 for her recently, because she was good in Everything Everywhere All at Once. Mm-hmm. And now I would even say she was better in The Bear. And what's his name? John Bernthal. He was Shane in The Walking Dead. He plays the brother in The Bear, and he's got this mustache. He looks just like Fred Ward in Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins.
I thought that too. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing when I saw it.
I always relate everything back to Gen X pop culture. But but again, both those shows are not comedies to me. Like The Bear is not even close. Barry has some dark humor in it and stuff like that from time to time, but these are not comedies, I don't think. So it's kind of weird.
It's really loosey goosey how they define these shows, or allow the people who make these shows to define whether or not they feel it's a comedy. Yeah, it would be nice to have some more definitive guidelines, but whatever, it is what it is. I'm not going to overthink it.
Oh, there was another one that my wife made me watch. Because I make her watch all these old shows. She makes me watch new stuff, and she made me watch The Diplomat with Kerry Russell. And funny enough, I didn't really love it. And you know me, Derek, I love politics. Like when I studied political science in my undergrad, I was so much into international relations and diplomacy. You'd think I would just love this show. I didn't really like it that much. I thought it was just okay.
No, I haven't seen it, but I did read something on it. And what I was reading was it's more of a soap opera than anything else. It's all about like love triangles and who's sleeping with who. And I thought, well, then I'm not interested. So that's part of the reason I haven't watched it. Now, is that sort of a fair assessment of what the show, like, obviously it's more, I would say more than that.
No, I would say the majority, like 80% of the show is focused on diplomatic issues, and some of them are, and like I say, I like this stuff. I found it hard to keep up with at times. It's really complicated and stuff, and like maybe 20% is about the the love triangle stuff and things like that. But I don't know, I just didn't dig. One thing I really did like about it though was Kerry Russell.
Hey, she's great.
So I always harp about these celebrities that get all this plastic surgery, like Madonna and Courtney Cox. It was really refreshing to see Kerry Russell just allow herself to just age. You know, I mean, it helps that she's already beautiful.
I was going to say, she still looks like $1 million bucks. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. So, but I mean, you know, so were some of those other celebrities. You know, they were good looking, but then they went under the knife and they look unrecognizable. But I thought Kerry Russell, when I'm watching the show, she looks her age, and she doesn't wear very much makeup at all, which you know, so I thought that was good. And the other thing is, like, she's really got good acting chops. I never watched what was that show, Felicity?
The Americans? Oh, the Felicity? Yeah.
Yeah, I never watched that, so I didn't know anything about her. I didn't know her at work at all. But man, she is a really good actress. So even though I didn't like the show itself, I thought her performance was really, really good. She deserves an Emmy for that. I don't know if she'll get nominated or not, but she deserves it. So
fair enough. Let me jump in with a few TV shows that I watched that I like that were recognized, or that are, you know, got a lot of accolades. Basically, in prep for this show, I did a lot of searches like what are people's favorite, you know, top 10 shows, top 20 shows, top 10 streaming shows, top 10 network, you know, because I didn't want to overlook something obvious. And there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make most people's list that I'm not going to go into. Like, you know me, as I watch them, I talk about them on our recaps at the beginning. But the ones that stood out that were getting a lot of accolades over and above the ones that you already talked about. This new season of Fargo on FX with Juno Temple from Ted Lasso, who we were just talking about, and John Hamm. They're the two primary performers in it. It's fantastic. I think there's only one more episode to go. So technically it started in 2023 and has straddled into 2024. So that one's a little bit of a cheat. I told you earlier a while back, I watched the miniseries The Fall of the House of Usher, which I really enjoyed on Netflix. The show on Amazon, The Boys, there was a spinoff this summer called Gen V about kids at a school for kids with superpowers. It was quite good. If you watched The Boys and enjoyed The Boys, this is more of the same, and it was quite good, really strong. I had an Apple TV subscription at the start of the year, and one of the shows that was on that I didn't get to finish, but I saw most of the episodes, called Silo. It's, again, a post-apocalyptic, which I know you would hate, but it was really good, really strong. I really enjoyed it. And the second season is about to come out pretty soon, so I may have to renew my Apple TV. And then sort of the two big critically acclaimed shows that I think everyone's going to be talking about come award season here is, again, another post-apocalyptic, The Last of Us, with Pedro Pascal, and Succession, which also was another show that had its last season. So on the same night on HBO, there was the last episode of Succession and the last episode of Barry. Like, talk about your must-see TV. Mm-hmm. Succession has been acknowledged as sort of the leader in scripted dramas the last couple of years. It's won all the awards. Pretty much everybody in the cast has been nominated up and down. I don't expect that to be any different this year. I think it'll go out on a huge positive note. I think everybody associated with the show is going to get acknowledgement for that. But Last of Us, really strong. There is obviously going to be continued seasons of it, but this first season right out of the gate, very, very strong. A good sort of replacement show for people that started watching The Walking Dead and either gave up on it, or I think this was the last season for The Walking Dead. So if you were looking for something that's sort of in that similar kind of vein, this was a good replacement. So yeah, those were sort of my highlights from TV, with Succession and The Last of Us being sort of the top of the pile. And if you aren't watching those two shows, if you didn't want, I mean, Succession's over. If you didn't watch Succession, you may want to go back and take a look. Last of Us was just super strong. Over the holiday break, they did a marathon of all the episodes. I think there's 10 episodes. And one of the early episodes, I think it's the third episode, is a love story between two of the male characters and how they met and how they fell in love. It's basically their whole life in a flashback. And it's got very little to do with the main story, but it just reminds you of how other people handled the end of the world. And it is honestly the best scripted television program I watched all last year. I watched it again over Christmas when it was on, and it just tugs at your heartstrings in all the right ways. It's so good. So if you're not watching The Last of Us, give it a go.
So I started watching that show with my wife, and I just couldn't get into it, so we gave it up. But I made it as far as that episode. That's the guy with, isn't he from like Parks and Recreation or something like that? Yeah. And he's like normally a comedic actor or something.
Usually, yeah. I'm trying to think of his name and it escapes me. And his wife is,
That episode was fantastic. So I agree with you. It was so good. I was like, holy crap. That was really good. But the rest of the show I didn't like. So I just didn't dig it. And yeah, you mentioned The Walking Dead too. I forgot about that. That ended last year. My wife and I watched it. I didn't really enjoy the end of that either. I thought it was kind of bad.
I gave up on The Walking Dead years ago, but my wife watched every single episode, and she was happy with the way it ended. I think there's one last spinoff that's still ongoing, but again, I gave up on it so long ago. I honestly don't care anymore.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about music. So needless to say, I don't really keep up on, new things. But one thing I mentioned on a previous episode last season, that the Bare Naked Ladies came out with a new album last year in 2023. It was called In Flight. So Derek, I have a question. What would you say is the Bare Naked Ladies' best song? If you had to.
Well, I mean, if I had $1 million, it's clear their signature song. Whether or not you consider it their best, it definitely would make my top 5 of my favorite songs by them. But I think it's got to be them. That's their signature song.
I think if you asked 100 people what their favorite Bare Naked Ladies song was, 99 would say if I had $1 million.
Or the theme song from The Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, that one's pretty popular too.
I think a lot of people, maybe that was their introduction to the Bare Naked Ladies. And as far as I know, they do perform that song live in most of their concerts.
Yeah, they did when I saw them last year. So I did want to mention, I'm in the minority because, I like only old stuff, as you know. So this is kind of weird. But my all-time favorite Bare Naked Ladies song isn't If I Had $1 Million. It's Love and Life. It's from In Flight from 2023. I love this song. I play it in the car for my kids all the time. They love it. I played it for my students in class. They loved it. I love this song. So I actually liked something from last year. So it's pretty cool.
There you go.
Also music. I want to talk a little bit about Taylor Swift. So here's the thing. I could not name a single one of her songs. But I don't think you could mention 2023 in music and not talk about Taylor Swift. Her tour in North America, it was only like 60 performances. It took in over $1 billion in revenue.
Yeah, I read it brought in like more money than the GDP of like half the countries in the world or something. Yeah, I read all these weird statistics based on how successful the show was, and it's just crazy bananas.
And she had a theatrical release of her tour as a movie.
Yeah. And
it made over $175 million at the box office. And then it went to the streamers and it continued to generate money there. So, and the thing was, as the year went on, Taylor Swift's popularity and her revenue generation for that matter, just kept growing and growing. But the thing is, not everyone loved Taylor Swift. So, Derek, you know how I've always have to go with my racist uncles at family gatherings.
Yeah, sure.
They hate Taylor Swift. So I was at Christmas.
Really? She started off as a country singer. How do the racists not like her?
I know. So I'm at Christmas with them, and I come right out and I asked one of the most racist of the uncles. I said, "Why do you hate Taylor Swift?" Because I'm curious to know this, right? I want to know. And he goes, "I hate her because she dates guys, and then after they break up, she writes songs about them." And I'm like, that's it? So she basically does what every single solitary male singer has done since the beginning of time? And he's like, "Oh, what do you know?" He calls me a libtard. So I tell you, I think this idea of this young, successful, super rich female is like a threat to some people.
Oh my God, totally.
Like, I don't think it has anything to do with her dating guys and writing songs. I think she's using her fame and her power to try and convince people to get out and vote. And that scares them.
And I think there's a certain amount of jealousy too. It's like, hey, how come this person can do this? And, people are just,
Like I say, she's been very vocal this year. Like, everyone should go out and vote. Young people should go vote. And the thing is, when only old people vote, we all know how that ends up. And when young people get motivated to vote, old white people get scared. Actually, I should rephrase, old white conservative men get scared. So did I say at the top of the show I wasn't going to get political? Sorry. Sorry. But the thing is, it's like, they don't hate Taylor Swift because she writes songs about breakups. Give me a friggin' break. Like, don't in my ear and tell me it's raining. They hate Taylor Swift because she represents a shifting of the balance of power. And I say all the power to her. I mean, she's successful, she's talented, she's rich, she's influential. You know what I say? I say, you go, girl. Do people still say that? They used to say that back in the 80s.
Probably not.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so there was, in addition to music and movies and TV shows, there's a lot of things that happened last year. One thing that stood out to me was the writer's strike. So, after COVID and the pandemic, studios started to cut back, on their workforce. And that includes writers, unfortunately. But the thing is, like, studios saw a shift in their revenue model. Like, they were starting to see all this money coming in from, like, streaming. And there was no, like, residual structure in place for the writers. And the writers just wanted to ensure that they were getting paid for their work. And I think another big issue was AI. And writers obviously wanted to avoid any situations with studios where they might get replaced with AI-generated content. And there was other, reasons for the strike, but I think those were some of the big ones. So the Writers Guild went on strike in May last year, and then they stayed on the picket line until September. A lot of actors backed them up. I remember Mayim Bialik, she left during the last week of Jeopardy's shooting schedule to support the writers. Funny enough, Derek, she was dropped soon after that as co-host. Freaking studios, I tell you. Not all talent were backing the writers. I remember Bill Maher. He went ahead with his show. Bill Maher sucks anyway, though. Anyway, they finally came to an agreement in October. But I mean, it was a big deal. Like, that would dominated the headlines last year. And it really affected pop culture too, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, maybe not so much in the short term, but I think what we're going to find is into 2024, there's less material, like there's less movies, there's less TV, because there was like from the way I understand it, a lot of the shooting schedule, things are done. You shoot the movie ahead of its release. Obviously, you got to, but so like things that would have been shot in the fall that would have been scheduled to come out in the spring or in the summer they didn't get done. So a lot of that shooting, a lot of that prep that would have been done now is only just starting up. So I think this summer we're going to have way fewer movies. We're going to have way fewer scripted programming on TV. And I think we're going to start to, they were on strike last year, but we're going to really feel the pinch this year. Now, in expectation that this was probably going to happen, I know that some of the bigger networks and the streaming services held back on programming that was already available. So, for example, HBO had the 4th season of their show True Detective, which I believe was supposed to start the first week of September as part of their kickoff to the fall lineup. And then in light of the strike, they opted to hold it. And it's not starting now until next week, because they knew they were going to have a pretty sparse 2024. So they're like, well, this one's got Jodie Foster. We've already generated some buzz. It's already getting good reviews from people who've seen the first episode. Let's wait. So I think that's what we're going to see, is some of these bigger networks, they're really going to try and space out the things that they expect to be big hits, and fans are going to have to wait a little longer for things that are already done, and even for those things that haven't even started yet. So
anything else happened last year in pop culture that you think we should touch base on?
Well, again, just to acknowledge a few, you touched on a few of them. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the whole thing about the Barbenheimer with Barbie and Oppenheimer dropping within a week or two of each other. And
that's why they melded everything together. Like, people were saying that.
Yeah, and that was great marketing. It got everybody into the theaters, whether you went and saw one or both movies. We got biographies from famous people like Britney Spears.
I just would back up a second. Yep. So were they like from the same movie studio, and so they did the marketing like that, or were they from different movie studios and they just kind of merged their marketing? Because it's very creative to do something like that.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
That was kind of cool, yeah, because that was a real thing,
I think the idea is, a tide, all ships are raised. How's that saying go? High tide raises all ships, or something like that. So it's, even if they were from different studios, generating that competitiveness or that conflict between the two encourages people to go to the theater, whether you're seeing one or both. People going to the theater helps all movies. So if you're going to go see one and it's sold out, well, then I might as well see the other one. And as we've talked about before, movies, like anything else, all about dollars and cents, and theaters make more money off concessions. So they want people through the door and the bums in the seats. They don't care what you're watching. They want you to show up, because most people want something to eat and something to drink while they're there. And that's where they're really generating the revenue. And if they're not generating that revenue, theaters start to close, and that creates all sorts of other problems. So in any case, Yeah, so I was mentioning a couple of big biographies that came out this year. Britney Spears wrote a biography and Prince Harry wrote a biography. So, there were obviously many other ones, but those were sort of two of the big pop culture ones that generated a lot of buzz. Personally, I'm not interested in reading either one, but I know people who have, and they enjoyed them, and that's great if that's your thing. We talked about the strike. We talked about Taylor Swift. We talked about AI. I don't want to get too into it, but the whole idea that with Elon Musk buying Twitter and changing it to X and basically killing the platform. So I'm sure that will come back to bite us all in the butt here in the next little bit. I know personally, I wasn't really on Twitter that much, but in light of all this, I have not been on Twitter since any of this happened. So I think there's a lot of people that are out there sort of the same. For me,
when I did my first podcast, when I did the Dear Mr. Fantasy baseball podcast, I basically grew an entire community on Twitter.
Yeah.
For that podcast. I had thousands and thousands of followers and like not even followers, there were connections. Like it was great. I thought Twitter was amazing. I thought Twitter was a tool that you could use just to connect with people over the world. I met Yancey Eaton on Twitter originally, and that's how we got connected and we got everything started with the podcast and everything here. But yeah, once Elon Musk took over and then the floodgates opened for all this hate speech and everything went on, I deleted my account. I'm not on it anymore. And it's unfortunate because it was great, for a while there.
Well, and for me, it's like, okay, well, I've been active on Facebook, not so much lately, but with Facebook, you have to actually invite, acknowledge, and accept the people that follow you. So if it's hard to make a connection with a stranger that you aren't actively trying to reach out to, whereas Twitter, literally anyone in the world can reach out to you and you can say, okay, I'm going to accept you or not, or you can request that they follow you. Like it doesn't, that was the beauty of that platform, is literally it could connect anybody with anybody, as opposed to something like Facebook, which needs those privacy shields because of the kind of things you generally will post. But it's like, for me, I'm not on Instagram. So it's like, well, I don't really have that kind of a social media presence now where I can just reach out to anyone in the world, or anyone in the world can reach out to me. And so I have felt that it's sort of a little closed off, but at the same time, it's kind of been a little bit of a sigh of relief not having to, I don't check my socials because I don't really have socials anymore. I stopped going on Facebook and I stopped going on Twitter. And it's like, okay, I have a few things I follow, but nothing like that. So I think that'll represent a change. I think there's a gap in social media in that sense that will eventually be filled by something.
Yeah, it seems like it's being filled by threads, for the most part.
Yeah,
so.
But you've still got Instagram and TikTok, but those aren't used in the same way that Twitter was used for. Yes, I know people would post pictures on Twitter that would be picked up on their Insta feed or vice versa. But again, just as someone who works in communication, there are different tools that can be used for different things. There's not to say that you can't use all the tools for certain things, in varying levels of success, but the reason these different things exist is because there are things that you can do with each one that you can not do with the other ones, or that you just can't do as well. And I think that what Twitter's niche, like, it did something very well that the other platforms didn't do as well, or didn't do it, at all. And I feel that that's still a gap in social media, and I'm sure that something will come up to replace it. Whether or not X dies or whether it goes back to what it was, I think the genie's out of the bottle on that one. I think it's, we're just counting the days until it blows up. But it'll be interesting to see what that becomes and how that affects social media, or how that affects pop culture.
Like I say, I moved over to the Threads, and I enjoy it over there. I think it's pretty good. So I want to talk a little bit about some celebrities who died last year, and especially some that meant something to me personally. So I want to start with one that's a bit obscure. Shecky Green. So he was a stand-up comic. He was big in Vegas. He opened up for like Sinatra and Elvis and all this. And he used to go on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson all the time. He even subbed in as a guest host for Johnny a couple of times. And he did all this TV back in the 70s. But I think most Gen Xers probably remember him best from Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1. He was Marcus Vindictus. He had the best quotes in that whole movie. So you remember when he was like, "Do you know the punishment for striking a Roman citizen? Okay, you in the back, you had your hand up first." That guy. And then when he was like, "He's a eunuch. He is a eunuch. He is dead.
He is dead." Yeah.
And then when he says, "Half of you men will run with me and the rest will run with mucus." I thought he was great. So he died last year. He was 97 years old.
Wow.
So I really always liked Shecky Green. I thought he was good. Another one I wanted to mention, older guy too, was Tommy Smothers. as you know, Derek, I tend to get a little political here from time to time. And one of the first people ever to use their platform to sort of promote politics and their beliefs were the Smothers Brothers. So if you're not familiar with them, they were these two guys that did this stand-up act with like music and jokes, and they got their own show, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour.
Yeah, that's where I remember them for.
Oh man, they would like criticize Nixon, and they would criticize the Vietnam War. They used to advocate for like civil rights and for free speech. Well, back in the 60s, you didn't do that. Like, not on network television, at least. So they were like super controversial, but they were amazingly influential. Like we've talked about this before, where some celebrities are more influential than they are famous, you know? And these guys, they just paved the way for other people to speak out, you know, and use their platform for good. So Tommy Smothers died just recently. It was like December 26th.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was just in the last week or two.
Cancer. Yeah. So I feel like he deserves to be mentioned. Do you have anybody that stand out to you? I got a bunch.
Well, I mean, there's a couple that we've acknowledged already on shows last year, so I won't dwell on it. But Tina Turner died last year. We talked about that when that happened. Paul Rubens, aka Pee Wee Herman, died. We talked about that. We reviewed Pee Wee's Big Adventure. But one of the more recent ones was just earlier in December. Andre Braugher died. People remember him as Captain Holt from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, or Pembleton from Homicide, the series, the drama series Homicide.
You introduced me to him because you were going on and on. I think we did an episode on like supporting actors in TV, and you were like Andre Braugher, and I'm like, I never watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine, so I was like, who's that? So I watched the show. He was fantastic on that show. God, he was good.
Yeah, he was great, and the fact that he had sort of earned his acting chops as a serious performer. Like, he earned an Emmy for his role in Homicide: Life on the Street, and was well respected among his peers. And he appeared, he had minor roles in movies. They tried to give him his own TV show. I remember there was a show he did where he was a doctor at like a medical school, and it only lasted one season. And the criticism was the show's too smart. People aren't able to follow the show. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. And then and then he ended up in this comedy ensemble, and you're like, wow, okay, I don't think of him as a comedic actor, but as we've talked about with comedy, you can't have everybody trying to be the guy telling the jokes. Like, you need a straight man. You need someone that the funny guy works off of. And it's like, he paired so well with Andy Samberg like that. You would have never thought this pairing is going to be great on TV for the next 7 years. You're like, not a chance. But it's like, both of them, I think, worked so well. He was really good. It was unfortunate to hear that he had died. He was 61 years old.
Norman Lear was maybe the single most influential person in television history. You could make that argument.
Yeah.
So he was a producer, obviously. Like, he just developed like a boatload of shows, like All in the Family and Good Times and The Jeffersons and One Day at a Time. Like, the thing was, he basically took sitcoms from being just about a family into being a reflection of society. And that was really transformational for television, because he wasn't afraid to tackle all these controversial topics and just sort of push them out there into people's living rooms. And at a time when conservatives kind of ruled the studios and what people got to see, Norman Lear came in and was just a game changer, and just prolific. I mean, he produced either wrote or created or produced over 100 TV shows. Like, crazy. And
like so many of them, like you said, like his top 10 is probably even his, like, if you were to remove the top 10 shows that he was associated with and you looked at his list from 11 to 20, that's probably still better than everybody else that was his peer. Like, his reach was just so great, and the kind of shows that he put out, it was just like nobody was on his level, not even close.
Marty Krofft, I want to mention. I loved Sid and Marty Krofft shows when I was a little kid. Back in the 70s, my absolute favorite was Land of the Lost. So when my son was little, me and him would watch old episodes of Land of the Lost on DVD. That was one of my favorite TV shows when I was a kid. But they also did shows like H.R. Pufnstuf and Sigmund and the Sea Monsters. And there were these two other shows, a little bit lesser known, but I just loved them. One was called Yeah.
It sounds to me like these guys smoked a lot of weed.
I don't know what they were smoking.
If I had to guess, based on the shows you just talked about, I don't know them all, but the ones I know, I'm guessing there's a lot of marijuana involved.
They definitely made some of the trippiest TV shows in history, that's for sure. So Marty Krofft died in November of last year. Sid is still with us. So, and so are their shows, which will live forever in memories, my memories for sure. I want to mention a couple of musicians, if I could. Robbie Robertson is one. Mm-hmm. So he's Canadian. He was a guitarist in the band, the backing band for Ronnie Hawkins and Bob Dylan, along with Levon Helm. So, and then they went on obviously to have, big hits of their own, like up on Cripple Creek and stuff. And Robbie Robertson was also an actor. He starred in a movie called Carney with Gary Busey and my all-time crush, Jodie Foster. I remember seeing that movie back on the movie channel back in the day. But I think my favorite thing about Robbie Robertson was back in 1987, he went sort of back to his roots. And so his mother was a First Nations Indigenous woman. So he made this album in 87 called Robbie Robertson. And it was all about his Indigenous roots. And he did songs like Broken Arrow and Somewhere Down the Crazy River. Remember that? Somewhere Down the Crazy River. Mm-hmm. And my personal favorite was Showdown at Big Sky. It was just, I thought he was a really super talented musician. And he was one of those guys that was just like really respected by his peers. Like maybe more respected by his peers than by mainstream fans. So, and speaking of mainstream fans, another one, Rodriguez died last year. I don't know if you know him or if you heard of him.
I don't even know him. No.
So there was a documentary, 15 years ago. It was called Searching for Sugar Man.
Oh, yes. I've heard of that one. Yes.
Man, what a story. So Rodriguez was this Latino folk singer back in the 60s. Man, was he good. He could have been bigger than Bob Dylan. I mean, he probably should have been. But the thing is, back then, record execs, they didn't promote Latino musicians, right? So they just all got pushed aside, But the thing was, lo and behold, he made these albums and they became massive underground hits in South Africa, of all places. So one day, this fan in South Africa goes looking for him in America and finds him. He was doing like odd jobs as a construction worker in Detroit, and they get him to go back and do this like sold out concert in Johannesburg, South Africa. Like what a story. And it's all in the documentary Searching for Sugarman. It's so good. So he died last year. He never got the fame he deserved. He did this song back in the 60s, and you should go and look it up. It's called I Wonder. Find it on, Apple or wherever you want to go on. If you do Amazon Music, I Wonder. Just listen to it. That should have been the biggest counterculture song of the 60s. It's that good.
Wow.
Oh my God, he was fantastic. Who else? Richard Mole. Remember him?
Oh, from Night Court? Richard
yeah,
Mole?
yeah. I always remember him from Metal Storm, The Destruction of Jared Sin. Part of that whole 3D craze when I was a kid back in 83. But he was obviously Bull Shannon in Night Court. Man, he was good. He made that role so memorable. Like he had this imposing look. He was tall and bald and kind of scary looking, but he just made it his own. Like he was so lovable and stuff. And the way he delivered his lines, like definitely a memorable guy. So
I also remember him a little bit later in the 90s. He did a lot of voice work on cartoons and things like that. And he was the voice of Harvey Two-Face in the Batman the Animated Series, which was very, very well acclaimed and well respected by Batman fans as sort of the definitive cartoon animated version of Batman. So the fact that he was one of the recurring villains on many of the episodes gave it. I mean, that was one of the things with that show is it like they had Mark Hamill was the Joker, right? Like they got celebrities that had recognizable voices as a way to encourage new people to watch the show, to give it some credibility, and he did a great job with that. So
Cindy Williams, I want to mention, she started off obviously on Happy Days as one of Fonzie's girlfriends. And based on her appearance there with Penny Marshall, they got a spinoff, Laverne and Shirley. I watched that show all the time when I was a kid. She was also in American Graffiti. And I remember not that long ago, a good friend of mine who's an actor up here in Canada, he worked with her in a play in Toronto. And he said she was just wonderful to work with. I thought she was really talented. And she was a really good physical actress. Like some of the physical shtick that they would do on Laverne and Shirley, that was pretty over the top. It was good. I liked her a lot. I want to mention, we recently reviewed A Christmas Story at the end of our last season. Melinda Dillon died last year. She played the mom in that movie. And she was in Close Encounters. She got an Oscar nomination for that. She also got nominated for Absence of Malice. And she was in Slapshot, one of the best sports movies ever. She was such an incredibly unique actress, I thought. Just like beautiful, but not like in the traditional Hollywood bombshell way. And just a really talented actress. Kind of quirky and odd, but kind of normal. Just all kind of all wrapped up in one. She was very unique. Any other celebrities? Oh, God, I got so many to go through.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just hit a couple here before we go back to your list. So I will acknowledge Matthew Perry from Friends, obviously died at the end of October. Obviously, that's his legacy as Friends, no question about it. I mean, he did a couple other less memorable sitcoms. He had some parts. He did a handful of movies, but you know, his legacy absolutely is the season. How long did Friends run? 10 seasons? Like. Yeah. That's it. You know, they always, you know, and I don't mean to be flippant about this, but you always say, oh, well, when this performer dies, what's going to be the first line of their obituary? Literally, I was just listening to a podcast. They were talking about Ridley Scott because the movie Napoleon just came out, and they were talking about like all of Ridley Scott's movies. And they said, you know, when Ridley Scott dies, what's going to be the first line of his obituary? Is it going to be Ridley Scott, director of Alien? Is it going to be Ridley Scott, director of Gladiator? Like, and so they had this big argument about it. Well, I mean, there's no arguing it. I mean, and we can look it up if we need to, but Friends was always going to be.
But the thing with him, like, I mean, his greatest legacy was Friends, but he spent a lot of time in recent years trying to help others that suffered from addiction issues. And that's a big part of his legacy too, I think. You know,
sure. I wasn't aware of that, but I'm glad to hear that he did it because I know he had substance abuse problems. I mean, hell, we saw it on Friends. He went from super skinny to super heavy to super skinny. Like it was clear that, you know, over the course of that show, he was suffering from a lot of addiction issues. And I mean, it wasn't a secret that it was the biggest show on TV. They couldn't help but report every dirty little secret that was happening in his life at the time. And I'm sure that didn't help his addiction issues. But yeah,
you could argue that he was the most talented member of the of that cast too. Like I mean,
that's a hot take. I mean, out of the six, I don't know if I'd put him at the top. But
I would. I
always thought he did a good job.
I thought he was perfect as Chandler. And the thing was, I loved how his character kind of evolved. Like he started out, he was just making sarcastic remarks all the time.
Yeah.
But by the time that he fell in love with Joey's girlfriend, Paget Brewster, and then he hooked up with Monica, like he became a deeper character. And I still think he was the funniest cast member there.
Oh, no question. Well, I found that, again, we're getting a little off topic, but the Chandler-Joey relationship of that show, that made the show. Like, honestly, any episode that doesn't have the two of them doing something together, I would just fast forward through. Like, I wasn't a huge fan of the show. Even when it was on, I didn't really watch it. I watched the last couple seasons because by then I was dating, you know, Kay, who was not my wife. She watched it religiously. Like, that was one of her favorites, so we would watch it together. I mean, it's not that I disliked it, but it was never on my radar as a show I had to watch. But in the years after, when I went back to watch the reruns, it's like, you know, a lot of the episodes I just couldn't, a lot of the drama, the whole Ross and Rachel thing, like not interested. I just wanted, like, it should have been the Joey and Chandler show. I would have watched it all day long.
And funny enough, Matthew Perry might have never got that role if John Cryer's audition tape hadn't gotten lost in customs. So John Cryer was over in England doing a play, and he taped an audition and put it on a VHS tape and mailed it. And it never made it to Hollywood. I'm not saying that the producers would have picked him over Perry.
Yeah, but
they probably
as a more
would
recognizable name out of the gate, they might have wanted him just to give the show a little bit of credibility right from the beginning. Because otherwise, everyone else was pretty much unknown. So
yeah, because he had done movies at that point too, right? So
let me just hit a couple others.
Who else you got?
Bob Barker of The Price is Right. I mean, obviously, in his later years, Bob Barker, there was allegations of sexual abuse and misconduct on the show, and I know a lot of that got set. I believe a lot of that got settled out of court. You know, I think it came down to the fact that he was a dirty, horny old man, and he did things he wasn't supposed to. And at the end of the day, he ended up having to pay a lot for it. And I think it hurt his reputation and a little bit hurt his legacy. But I mean, the guy was on TV forever and a day. He did all those episodes of The Price is Right. And the things he did with, the whole help control your pet population, like his activism with animal rights can't be ignored, and the good that he's done in that regard. So, not to belittle the things that he did to people that, the women on his staff, that was unfortunate, but he still has a lasting legacy. And to this day, as a huge Boston Bruins hockey fan, anytime I go to a Leafs game and it's against the Boston Bruins, of course, they show the scenes from Happy Gilmore where, Bob Barker and Happy are fighting, and Happy's wearing his Boston Bruins sweater, and Bob Barker kicks the crap out of him. So I think that's something that
the price is wrong, bitch.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of younger people who maybe don't have that Price is Right connection, that's what they remember Bob Barker for. And hey, if that's it, that's it. And then finally, the last. So
back to Bob Barker, because I remember he started out in radio, and he found out early on he had a real knack for like kibitzing with just regular people, and the producers picked up on that too. So they made him the host of Truth or Consequences back in like the early days of TV, black and white TV, and then when CBS came up with Price is Right in '72, he obviously found his place in TV history. I liked Drew Carey in his old sitcom, but he is crappy as a game show host.
He is not a great host.
And even worse, he's following on the heels of one of the best game show hosts ever. Bob Barker was he was like 99 last year when he died. Crazy.
Yeah. No, it's
he was definitely a TV icon.
And then, so completely out of left field here, Mad Magazine, Al Jaffe, who most people, if you're familiar with Mad Magazine, so he was a cartoonist. The thing I read here said he's an award-winning cartoonist, and he's known for doing the fold-ups at the back of the Mad Magazines and
fold-ins.
Fold-ins, pardon me, and snappy answers to stupid questions. Those were two of the things that he contributed to Mad Magazine, along with the illustrations. He was 102, and I believe he worked on Mad Magazine just up until like last year or the year before. So, Mad Magazine is what it is. Maybe it doesn't have the place in pop culture today with today's audience, but people of a certain age, of a certain generation, you say Mad Magazine, like immediately it invokes a whole flood of memories, and that magazine wouldn't have been as successful as it was without his contributions. So I just want to acknowledge that Al Jaffe died at 102 years old just this past April.
And there was just a huge list of other people like Richard Roundtree, who did Shaft, and Suzanne Summers died last year, and Gordon Lightfoot. And
Sinead O'Connor.
Sinead O'Connor, who, everybody always knows from Nothing Compares to You, but I always liked The Emperor's New Clothes. That was such a good song. Harry Belafonte and Burt Bacharach died last year. And Topol, who was in Fiddler on the Roof and Flash Gordon and For Your Eyes Only. And Richard Belzer was another guy. He was kind of like under the radar.
Another guy from Homicide: Life on the Street.
Oh yeah, that's where he did his big thing. But back in the 70s, he was like part of that underground comedy that came up through like Lemmings and Second City and all that stuff. And Raquel Welch died last year. And Treat Williams, who was like an actor's actor, and a Canadian Sue Johansson. She used to do these like Sex with Sue things, and she was like huge up here in Canada. William Friedkin, who was a director of The French Connection and The Exorcist, died. Jerry Springer died. I know you're not a big wrestling guy, but Terry Funk and the Iron Sheik died last year.
Right, I remember the Iron Sheik, yeah.
And Burt Young, who was Paulie in the Rocky movies, and Chinatown, and Blood Beach, one of my favorites. There were just so many people, and Carlin Glynn, and the list just goes on and on. So, that's the look back at 2023. But anything, just before we move on, anything that we can look forward to in 2024? What's coming down the pike? I got to ask you that, because I don't know.
Well, sorry, let me just take a step back before we do that. So I just want to circle back to movies for a minute. There was a couple of movies, because, again, not to sort of dwell on it too much, but I want to just acknowledge there was a handful of movies that came out that were good for various reasons, or that were interested in me. So we'd already mentioned things like you talked about the top 5. So one of the ones that was in the top 5 is the Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which we've said could possibly be nominated for some Oscar recognition. I actually had a chance to watch that movie over Christmas, and it was outstanding. If you thought the first one was good, this one's even better. Fantastic. So 2 huge thumbs up from me on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse if you haven't seen it.
It'll win Best Animated Picture for sure.
Oh, I'd be shocked if it doesn't. Dungeons and Dragons put out a movie, yet another movie, but this one sort of, pushes all those other crappy ones from previous years aside, has a big cast, came out in March. Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves was pretty good, had a lot of wink wink moments for people who are familiar with the game like myself. So it was nice to finally see that that intellectual property and the creativity around the game get a movie that was worthy of that. So that was a big one for me. We mentioned a couple of the Marvel movies that came out. There was Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. There was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and there was the Marvels. I thought Guardians was really good. I thought the Marvels was really good. Ant-Man was decent, but again, a lot of computer animation, which doesn't do it for everybody. A surprising one for me was Cocaine Bear, which just sounded like it was going to be so dumb, and it was so much fun. I was like, I really enjoyed watching it, almost to the point where I felt a little guilty. Another one, I'm not a big fan of horror movies, but I definitely talked about this after I watched it. It's called Leave the World Behind, and the gimmick of that is it's nobody talks. There's no dialogue in the movie. It's about a woman who's a mute, and aliens sort of show up in her town. So again, it was an interesting one to watch. I really enjoyed it. And then there was Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, which honestly I can't remember if that came out at Christmas time last year or if it was early in 2023, but if you haven't seen it, it was fantastic. And then we've already talked about Barbie. We already talked about John Wick Chapter 4. So there were some really good movies that came out this past year that if you haven't seen, you should take a look at. A lot of fun movies. And as we mentioned, the Oscar winner was Everything Everywhere All at Once, which although it came out in 2022, won the Oscar in 2023. And let me tell you, if you haven't seen that yet, you missed out. Go watch it. It's fantastic. And if you haven't seen it since last year, go back and watch it again. I know I've got it on my watch list coming up soon because it's one of those movies that when you see it a second time, you're going to like it even more.
And is there anything that we got to look forward to in 2024, you think?
Oh, I mean, I'm sure there's all sorts of great stuff. As we mentioned, with the writer's strike, though, I think this is going to be an odd year. I think we're going to see the rise of smaller, more independent projects, things that don't need the big studio machine behind them, things that don't need $150 million. I think you're going to see people taking risks on unknown script writers, unknown directors, smaller production budgets, things that can get written, approved, shot, and produced and put out into the world in a very short time frame ahead of all these blockbusters that are on delay. So I think the last time I remember something like this happening was in the late 90s. You got a lot of it was like the rise of independent cinema, but you got things like the Blair Witch Project, which were just unlike anything else that was out at the time. It was shot on a shoestring budget and became a phenomenon, and it was another one, this huge word of mouth. I would not be surprised to see something like that in 2024, where we're going to see smaller things or even big performers and big producers, big writers, big directors, but doing smaller projects because they just want their work to get out there more quickly. And I think we're going to see the rise of a bunch of unknowns who probably aren't really unknown, just have never had a chance to get a break. And I think you're going to see some risks. And I think that they're not all going to work, but I think you're going to see some huge successes this year, a la the Blair Witch Project, these little indie darlings that end up just taking the summer by storm. So we'll see. We'll listen back a year from now and see if I was right.
Let me tell you, well, you know me, I hope you're right, because I always like original things coming out of Hollywood and smaller type things. So I hope you nailed that one. So we'll have to wait and see, but let's see how it goes. All right. In the meantime, what do you say that we have some
fun with Caveman?
Derek, we love game shows around here.
Oh,
so
yeah, we do.
What better way to kick off season 9 than to have you take a seat in the winner's circle of the $100,000 pyramid? All right, now you know how this works. I'm going to give you a list of clues. Derek, it's your job to guess the category. You have 60 seconds to get all 6 categories. If you get to the top of the pyramid under the clock, you get to pick the movie that we're going to review for next week. If you're unsuccessful, we watch the entire 4 seasons of WKRP in Cincinnati. I'm just kidding. We don't have to do that.
Okay.
All right. Are you ready?
I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be. Fire
All
away.
right. Go. I sit on the bridge of the Enterprise and I tell Spock what to do.
Captain Kirk.
Yes. Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime.
Streaming services.
Yes. The Luxor, Caesar's Palace, the Sphere, the Strip.
Oh, things in Las Vegas. Vegas
Yes,
Casino.
yes. I should have said Derek on holidays.
Drunk off his butt.
The Slasher, the Eerie Film Score, Graveyards, Suspense, Mist, Creepy Dolls, Psycho Killers, The Dark.
Movie?
What's that?
Things in a horror movie?
Yes. Stranger Things, The Queen's Gambit, The Crown.
Shows on Netflix.
Yes. Fox, Jordan, Jackson, Keaton, Bublé, Jay Fox.
Famous Michaels.
Yes, you got it. No, man, you did great. Awesome job. So you made it to the top in, I think, maybe record time around here. That was great. Okay, so like I said, you won, so you get to pick a movie for next time for us to review. I mean, last year we sort of had an overall overarching theme. Like last year, if you remember, we were looking at movies celebrating milestone anniversaries. This year, we're going to come up with something, I'm sure, and we're going to have lots of topics. But you want to kick us off with a movie? I mean, you usually handle the newer films, but what do you want to do?
Sure. So yeah, like you said, we'll come up with an idea. We're kicking some ideas around, but we don't have anything solid yet. So rather than go into it half cocked, let's just stick with the tried and true formula. I'll come up with something that's new. And one of the newer movies, and we talked about it quite a bit on this podcast. How about we go and watch the Barbie movie? Have you seen Barbie?
No, that would be great.
So I saw Barbie in the theater. I loved it. My wife asked for the DVD for Christmas or the Blu-ray, so she got that, and it's now on the streaming services. So I'm looking forward for an opportunity to rewatch it, and now I've got one. So why don't we watch Barbie? We'll come back next week and talk about it, because you know what this world needs? Two old white guys talking about the Barbie movie.
My wife will be so glad, though.
Maybe I'll see if we can get a woman on here to give the girls' perspective. And,
that'd be a great idea. Why don't we do that?
See if my wife's available. I mean, she's a busy woman, but I'm sure if we invite her and she's free, she'll join us. But no promises.
That would be great.
And that way, it's not just the two of us saying, "Well, you know what I think women should think," because no one wants to listen to that for 90 minutes. So
maybe we'll do that. So I'll tell you what. So next time we're going to come back, we're going to watch Barbie between now and then. We're going to come back. We're going to review the film, possibly have a guest with us. But until then, I'm Chris McBrien. That's Derek Myers. And we're saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.